So I'm Mark Simos. This is John. What was your last name? No, just kidding.
Right.
So welcome to You're Doing It Wrong. We started out with a little bit of a fun ode to cybersecurity there because we want it to be clear as we go through this that this is a love letter to security. This is not a hate letter. We will be calling out a lot of things that go wrong, but these are all in support of helping make us all better. So think of this as almost like a blameless postmortem. Do you have the clicker?
Yep.
Oh, you have the clicker. Awesome. So I am not going to read that out. First off, I'm kind of surprised they actually approved this title. You know, what are we, 2 buildings over from the big expo center? I'm like, cool, we're going to have fun. But what we're going to be focusing on today is common security anti-patterns. Anybody here not know what an anti-pattern is? Everybody knows what an anti-pattern is? Okay, yay, we got at least one honest person. Awesome. An anti-pattern is a common response to a recurring problem that's either wrong or just ineffective. So it's the opposite of a best practice, basically. It's when you do something that's wrong over and over and over again. So we're going to be talking a lot about those today. John, want to take us forward?
Sure. Standard disclaimer.
Yeah, everybody read that? Okay,
right,
perfect.
That's right.
Yep,
We're good. So in terms of agenda today, first we want to talk about anti-patterns. And as Mark said, this is blameless, right? We're talking about things that we collectively have not done well as an industry. And we're kind of giving them names and patterns so that we can identify them easily and quickly. Then we'll be talking about best practices or ways to fix and avoid anti-patterns, right? So we'll identify the anti-patterns, then we'll talk about the best ways to overcome them. And then we'll give you some resources and calls to action that'll be in three parts. First, we'll focus on outcomes instead of technology. Again, outcomes instead of technology. This will be a theme today. Secondly, we'll start with quick wins, or we'll outline quick wins and ways to ruthlessly prioritize your limited attention and resources in cybersecurity. And finally, we'll stress the need to work together as a team instead of blamestorming, instead of silos, instead of lots of things that lead to additional anti-patterns and problems.
So, as I mentioned earlier, anti-pattern is a common response to a recurring problem, something that comes up over and over again, and people commonly do the wrong thing. It's essentially a bad habit is another way of thinking about it, and it's usually one of two things, either ineffective, doesn't actually work, or counterproductive. And the reason why they are important because they provide us that critical lens, that view of what we're doing wrong so we can avoid it. Because a lot of time and effort gets wasted, which is not put towards useful things, opportunity cost. There's an economic concept called opportunity cost, which is, the true cost of doing A versus B is that you can't do B if you choose A, you can't do A if you choose B. That is the true cost of doing something, not necessarily the ticket price for A versus the ticket price for B. It's the opportunity that you have lost by choosing one versus the other. And so that's a huge, huge thing because you end up wasting your time on things that don't do good security work, and then you aren't doing the good security work. That's the true cost. And then, of course, increasing the organization's risk as a result of that, or by making a poor choice that seems like a good idea but isn't. And there's sort of this old adage that learning from your own mistakes is smart and learning from the mistakes of others is genius. And so we're going to hopefully share a little bit of stuff that'll make you a little bit more of a genius.
And we're open to learning too.
Always.
Of course.
So, is this one you or me?
This is you.
Me. Okay, awesome. So, we like to call... Y'all have experienced a Groundhog Day incident, right? Where you keep investigating the same thing over and over again. You get kind of burned out, kind of tired of it, kind of frustrated, seeing a lot of head nods in the audience.
If you worked as a tier 1 analyst, you almost certainly discovered this or still do. It is painful. I can speak from experience.
And then the reality of fixing this is not just throwing a IP address block or an IOC block out there. It's about understanding the attack technique and fixing and mitigating the actual attack technique, which requires the IT architects, engineers, operations folks who own and control those systems to actually implement that. So how many of y'all talk between those two teams? Good, see some hands. How many of y'all work with organizations that don't talk between those two teams? Okay, we're seeing some reluctant honesty there. Okay, good. And so that is really, really critical to be able to have that conversation. We'll talk about that more as we go. but this is the most common symptom that we see.
Thank you. So let's talk about some underlying root causes and themes to our anti-patterns. First of all, and a really common sort of mistake or problem is technology-centric thinking. This is thinking that if we just find the right technology, or if we configure things the right way, we'll then have solved all of our security problems, or that if we do X, then Y will follow. We'll get security right. Security is hard. Security is complex. Security is a journey. It's all the things that we sort of, I think, intuitively know, but we don't always follow in our day-to-day work and our day-to-day planning. So technology-centric thinking is sort of a problem undergirding many of these anti-patterns that we're talking about. Secondly is the silver bullet mindset, right? If we just find the right tool, or if we just do the right thing, these two are related, you'll see. If we just buy the right tool, right, then this will be solved. You sometimes even hear it in the language, like we are a fill-in-the-blank shop, right? We are a whatever vendor product we bought shop. That becomes the de facto strategy. And it's not really good for anybody, right? Because technology doesn't solve problems that are problems of people, that are problems of process, and that are problems of technology. It at best solves one of the three.
My favorite example of that is a business email compromise where someone gets a phone call or an email and says, hey, can you approve this transfer to this particular address? It's really urgent, it's really important. That's not a technology failure that the person hits the button. That's a process failure and a training failure, or both. And so it's really critical for us to be looking at these problems as they are, whether they're people or process or technology, that you are solving the problem at hand, not just trying to throw a tool at it. A lot of this stems from, in the early days of security, everything was a network problem because, quite frankly, security teams grew out of the network teams, right? I can see some hands on that, maybe? Yeah, okay, I'm seeing some head nods and some laughs, yep. And there's nothing wrong with that. That is a key part of security. It's just not the only part of security. And we used to slide in a 19-inch rack that would go somewhere in the ingress-egress flow going inside and outside the organization, and that's how security was done. There's an email appliance, there's a firewall appliance, and they all had different color bezels. Y'all remember those? Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that has moved into SaaS space, and so hey, we have a SaaS app or a tool or whatever to fix that, or a script if we couldn't afford a tool. And so that type of thinking has essentially silently followed us, and we need to be breaking ourselves of that and thinking about it in terms of outcomes.
Now, to be clear, those tools are still important. I think what we're really getting at here, and at the risk of belaboring the point, I don't want to, those tools are not in and of themselves a condition for success. They're not enough. We can't simply say a tool will fix our problems, because it won't. Yep. And undergirding all of this really is money. Let's be honest. We've all been at the expo floor. We know exactly what's happening all week, right? There's tremendous pressure to buy. There's tremendous pressure to monetize everything. There's tremendous pressure to sell. It's not a bad thing. It's just that in and of itself doesn't solve technology or security problems. It doesn't reduce risk to the business.
Yeah, and the one thing, there was a great session earlier in the week, The Price is Wrong, I don't remember the rest of the title of it, that kind of revealed some of the hidden silver bullet thinking, because there's a lot of different ways this shows up. If a vendor comes up and says, I will solve your security problems now, y'all know that's kind of a pile of not pleasant stuff, right? But when someone says, hey, this breach was caused by this vulnerability, that's also silver bullet thinking, because it frames the problem as there was only one thing that went wrong, not that there was a persistent attacker that tried 5 other things and would try 5 more, but it frames it as only one thing went wrong and everything else was perfect. And so that lends itself to the only solution possible is silver bullet thinking. So be careful of all the ways that there are hidden silver bullet frames that people are trying to draw you into. So
I like that hidden silver bullet thinking as well. Not the sort of silver bullet thinking that you necessarily are aware of, but start to spot that where it's kind of unstated in your day-to-day work.
Yeah, and there are plenty. We've been walking around the conference. There are plenty of overt silver bullet messages out there.
That too. It's kind of like once you start to identify them, you see them everywhere. At least I do, I guess, at this point. Okay, so let me give you a minute to absorb this. The sort of the paradox of blame, right? We start out with security warns about an issue. Hey, we've got this problem that we feel is a significant risk to the business, right? And then the business comes back and says, well, maybe that's too expensive, or we can't fix it because of, or my favorite, we accept the risk, right? Unless you're a CEO, it's pretty hard to accept the risk on behalf of a business. And then security's blame when something goes wrong. It doesn't end well for anybody. The business ends up with exposure to risk and to business interruption, and we end up with security being blamed. So Yeah, how many people have experienced that? Show of hands.
Is this familiar?
I think most of us, yeah.
Yeah,
Hopefully
Sandlot
this is,
Science,
yeah. And on top of that, this ends up, I think, in a bit of a spiral, kind of an invirtuous cycle, right? Blame creates fear that drives cover your assets mentality, right? We'll keep it G-rated. Hiding in technical and security facts, right? I think many of us, I'll speak for myself, are guilty of this, right? When we feel we're becoming blamed, we end up sort of hiding in fleeing and hiding in what's really comfortable to us, right? Security and technical facts. That doesn't really help the business, right? I used to say somewhere between the sort of director and VP level, something happens where risk isn't really translated to business risk, and it doesn't usually end well for the business, right? If I can only speak technology, if I can only speak security, business leaders don't understand that. It's not their job to understand it. I've got to be able to translate that into the language that they speak to really make this real for them.
Yeah, because nobody likes it when that finger of blame is floating around and it's like, is it going to land on me?
Yeah.
Is it going to land on me? When people are in that environment, they are not at their best. They're not being a good partner. They're not able to support and enable the organization. All they're doing is trying to avoid blame. They're going to their safe space, to the technology. I'm going to tell you the technical truth, and it's your job to translate it. See ya, you can't blame me. And that doesn't actually help you manage risk better. It may help protect them from a bad culture or from getting the blame, but it doesn't actually help with the risk. So introducing blame into the equation pretty much poisons the water hole. So very, very critical that we take a blameless approach, which I believe is my next slide.
Absolutely.
And we advocate for this for a whole number of reasons. And at the end of the day, security is hard. It's really hard. We literally have to deal with smart, motivated, creative, intelligent attackers that are going after a technical system that was built over 30 or more years, and most of the people that designed and built those systems have started to retire, and nobody understands them, and it's highly complex. There's dependencies that aren't documented, and the business is trying to be agile and changing all this. There is no way that you could say something is correct or not correct in that environment. It's a matter of risk. This is a highly complex, highly difficult thing. And on top of that, the best practices for security are forming as we speak and have been forming in recent years. When you talk about security, we've been around for what, 20, 30 years? I think the RSA conference has been around, which is a pretty good barometer for it. But like, we're not looking at like building materials and architecture that we can look at ancient Roman stuff and ancient Egyptian stuff and ancient Chinese stuff from 2, 3, 5, 10,000 years ago and see what they did and what they learned, and we've been getting better ever since. We're talking some of the original folks that have been figuring out cybersecurity are actually still alive and around this conference. That is how new of an industry we are. And so being able to say, oh, we're going to blame you because you didn't do your job perfectly, well, what the hell are the standards of due diligence I'm supposed to meet? It's not really that well written down. So we have to give ourselves and our colleagues in IT, in business, in our teams, we have to give them forgiveness, give ourselves forgiveness, give ourselves kindness, and recognize that this is hard, and we're figuring it out, and we're human, and we're making mistakes, and we're getting better at it. It's critical to take that attitude on it.
So it's important to hold IT and business colleagues accountable here. And insist that they are kind and blameless, but mostly we're speaking to ourselves here. We're speaking to security folks here. I encourage you to be the kind of security person you want to be in the world, right? Are you the sort of security person that you would want to work with? Are you hiding in technical facts? Are you casting off blame? Or are you saying, let's help you meet these business goals? However, here is some risks that we need to be aware of, right? Let's help you to meet the goals while you are increasingly secure.
So if I'm the kind of security person, say John's in IT here, and I say, hey, why didn't you patch that system? Don't you know that's important? You suck.
Yeah.
Or, hey, did you know that you're missing some patches? I can talk about which ones are the most important because I know you got a schedule coming up and you've got a release coming, but these are the ones that I think you should fit into that.
How do we get this patched while also ensuring business recoverability in business?
Yeah, and that people meet their goals as an IT person, et cetera. Be the kind of security person that you would want to work with. And that changes a lot of things. And people start seeing you differently. And the good news is everybody in security has been so rude for so long, not everybody, but many people, that it's easy to stand out with just a little bit of kindness.
Oh, man.
And this one's me, right? Yep.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of anti-patterns that draw from those root causes that essentially instantiate. They come into the strategy and the program and the way it's managed. They come into the end-to-end architecture. They come into patching, or more often not patching. They come into access management and identity and networks and infrastructure and development and SOC. They're all over the place that we see these common anti-patterns and these common patterns of thinking reoccur over and over again. The deck is provided. It does have all of these in detail for y'all to read, so you can go to the session piece and get the PDF from there. And so that is available. We're not going to go through all of these. John is actually going to walk us through the SOC ones.
Thanks. Yep. So I want to talk about security operations centers. This is a special area of sort of passion of mine, and I expect many folks in the room. I think in these anti-patterns, and I won't drain this slide, but I think in these anti-patterns, what we often see are sort of evolution of our security operations centers, how we sort of built them over the last 10, 15, 20 years, right? Yes, we start, I think we actually went too far. I apologize.
Oh, it looks like the animations aren't there. Oh, well. Wait, okay. I'll bring it to the right place. Go.
Yeah, can you?
Yep, I'll fix it. You talk.
Thanks. So what we might see are evolutions, the evolution of Security Operations Center that will get us to where we need to be. No, not quite.
Well, we're getting there.
There we are.
Yeah,
Thank
there
you.
we go.
So the very first thing we wanted to do in security operations centers was we needed to collect, right? We saw all of these log files, this signal, all of these things we needed to detect, and mostly that happened not entirely, but mostly with the network, right? So we needed to detect things. Mostly the network was the source of security, the source of truth for security, and sort of away we went with that. Next slide. Thank you. That led to the sort of idea of not being of only trusting was invented here, right? In my SIM, I've got to write those analytics rules because no one knows exactly what is going on in my business as well as I do. That worked for a little while, and then we realized there are lots of tools to buy, right? So maybe what I'll do is I'll start with buying a tool that's as good or better than what I can write. But if there's one tool out there that I can find, then it'll match that silver bullet thinking, and that's the tool, right? I will be a blank shop, right? That will be my my strategy for my security operations center. And of course, my favorite, honestly, here I think is Toolapalooza. If one tool is good, let's buy them all, right? For years, I worked with a large financial company, and I was an Active Directory administrator. I'll age myself. If you don't know what Active Directory is, that was the system we had years ago. I'm kidding. And vice presidents and others would say, "Oh, here's the new tool. How long till it's on your domain controllers?" Right? It wasn't really good for anybody because there was no strategy. The strategy was, this is a great tool. Let's put it on there, right? And the domain controllers had increased risk. The business had increased risk, and frankly, it was really, really tiring to try to keep up with all the signal that was coming. It lacked a strategy, and so I encourage you to really have a discernible strategy in your security operations center, and to be conscious of these anti-patterns.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and ultimately the antidote for these, the best practices, is to take an outcome-driven, we'll talk about the outcomes in just a bit, but an outcome-driven top-down approach. It's not about, here's a whole bunch of tools, they bring us a whole bunch of data, what do we do with it? It's about understanding what the hell we're trying to do in the SOC, pardon my language.
Yep.
And that is the mission of security operations, which is basically reduce the amount of time attackers have access to your assets. Because SOC's job, security operations job, starts the moment the attackers gain access to your assets, and it ends, roughly, I mean, you do the handoff, but it ends when the attackers lose access to your assets. And so reducing that amount of time that they have access to your goodies, that is the mission of the SOC. And so how do you do that? How do you measure success on that? And how do you set up teams and organizational functions to make sure you are the best at doing that, reactively and proactively through threat hunting and some other means? And then, figuring out from there, what are the processes that are needed to support that, and those teams working together, the architecture, the tooling, the integration of those tools so people don't have to do swivel chair analytics between 3, 4, 8 consoles. And then getting through the education and the technology and the automation and the data strategy to support that. That is how you should be designing security operations, not, we bought this tool, what can we do with it? Very, very different way of thinking. You end up using a lot of those same tools, but you use them effectively for a purpose.
I think a really useful statement of this sort of set of anti-patterns is that rather than sort of collecting all the things, which ends up, I think, as a reaction to fear, a legitimate and a human one, but sort of reaction to fear. Sometimes SIM vendors actually tell us that, right? Just collect all the things and we'll search them out. It's really to have, the idea here is to have a really thoughtful conversation and strategy. What should we collect? What signal do we need? And how are we going to use it to reduce risk to the business?
Yep. So let's go through a few other fun anti-patterns. Well, this one's actually fairly unpleasant. How many folks have ever experienced this sort of loop of doom in a way where security basically is the Department of No because they're worried about being blamed, and then the business and IT folks are like, all they ever do is say no, and so they just skip them. Oh, okay, we'll bring them in at the end, like 3 days before the project's over, to just sign off on it and rubber stamp it.
Yep.
And then, of course, security gets more and more ticked off, and so they go and they say, well, we're going to say no even louder, and we're going to escalate it, and then they skip them even harder. Anyone seen this loop in progress? Sound familiar?
Yeah.
Yeah, seeing some wincing faces.
This is the way.
This is the way. I prefer
really sad
this is
but
the
funny.
old way.
Yeah.
Yeah, we prefer
need
this to be the old way.
We need security sign off at the 11th hour. And security goes, wait, what? What? You want what? I don't want to do that. Yeah.
And so this sort of downward spiral doom loop is a very frequent thing that we observe. We see a lot of different versions of this that show up in shipping basic security maintenance and patching and whatever. Security blame storming, I just love that term. And then of course we want zero downtime when it comes down to patches and all that, because we're going to blame you if there's a security incident. Why the hell would you do downtime and hurt our productivity metrics, right? So it's really about kind of building that relationship up. And so it's really, really critical to have a mutual understanding between security and the business. We're talking genuine partnership here, where security folks understand what business processes are at risk, and they're able to communicate in that language, and they're able to work as a partner and say, hey, I know that if this system goes down, it's a bad day for you. I'm trying to keep the attackers from taking down your system and hitting your margins in a way that's 100x worse than if you have to patch once a week, once a month, et cetera. And having that kind of conversation changes the frame, using their terminology, showing you care about it. Very, very important to have that mutually respectful conversation. It's not always easy to start, it's not always easy to do, but it is the way. This is the way, the right way, not the old way.
Yeah. It's sometimes just shifting that culture just a little bit can start to make an enormous difference. I've seen with lots of organizations where if security folks just reach out and say, hey, what's on your mind? What are you worried about with this infrastructure? What keeps you up at night? Sometimes they're the same things. It's just that nobody has that language. Nobody takes that first step to sort of start to bridge that gap.
Yeah, tell us about your business. What are you worried about? What are you focused on? What is your boss asking you to do? And how can I help you with that? And that stands in stark contrast to the way security often engages with IT in the business in many organizations.
Or doesn't engage with IT in the business.
Sometimes it's silently understood. Another one's sort of interesting. Have you all seen the situation where this is a very, very important workload? The business absolutely can tolerate zero downtime on it. We cannot have anything go wrong with it. Therefore, we're completely skipping security.
Yeah.
Right? So the sort of national security version of that is the president is so important. We cannot inconvenience him at all, so we are not giving him any Secret Service.
Yeah.
That's basically the same logic, and we need to be able to help people understand that if this is that important, then we need to work together harder and overcome those kind of challenges we normally face so that we can make sure that it's safe. Right? And so we need to be able to reframe that conversation.
I'll age myself again. Fine-grade password policies that give the executive board members simple passwords. Probably not the best idea, but asked for all the time.
Yeah, and it's important as you frame these things that at the end of the day, I like the analogy of a fire in a factory. Regardless of where the fire starts, wherever the security incident starts, it doesn't matter if it's this workstation or that machine, that production line. If there is a fire in the factory that burns the whole thing down, it's the same effect. And so security accountability goes all the way to the top, and then the responsibility is spread amongst everyone that makes a security impacting decision, right? If there's like a chemical explosion that blows the entire factory off the face of the earth, you have to understand what went wrong with it, but at the end of the day, that accountability for that is at the CEO, and everybody that made a safety-related decision to that should have known what was important and what the safety had to do with it, and what was their decision like in that safety. Whether it was designing the factory floor or carrying around a hot cup of coffee that could be thrown at something that would make someone slip, that would, trip the little emergency switch or something. You have to have people understand the consequences, the cyber consequences of that. There's a book I read recently called Behind Human Error. I started it recently. And it had this fantastic description. It talked about all sorts of different disasters, chemicals, chemical explosions and leaks, and big picture things. Had nothing to do with cybersecurity. It was like 28, I think the research was done about 20 years ago, if I recall correctly, if not more. And what they described is that the reason why those things happened, that people blamed on human error, was the humans were trying to do their best the whole time, and they were adjusting to all sorts of imperfections in the system and the machines and the policy. And they were doing the right thing as they went, but it was only when they get tired, when there was a conflict of interest or something else that caused those humans to stop being the magic fixers that are invisible in the system. That's when the big cascade failure of this led to this, led to this, led to this, led to bad. And in cybersecurity, we do a really bad job of engaging with the rest of the people in the system and helping them understand that if I click on this email, what is the consequence of that? If I am deciding to skip maintenance on it, on a particular system, what is the potential consequence of that? People don't understand the safety and security implications of their decisions. We have to involve them in it so our system can be more resilient. We cannot protect it with a thin outer shell of security people and security expertise while the system is operating without any care or knowledge of security. It will not work. We have to bring people in. They have to understand their role in security. Make sense? So another one that we see a lot is that people don't want to do the same thing over and over again, right? You just want to do one and done, put it behind you, and we're done. The problem with security is it's an infinite game. It keeps going over and over again. So if you do something once, you will probably need to do it again. That needs to go into a process, that needs to go into automation, or it needs to go into both. As the great philosopher Beyonce once said, if you like it, you should have put a ring on it. So always think about what you're doing and recognize that you want to have something in a process or automation so you don't have to remember this at the right time next time. So think about everything in terms of the life cycle of the data, of the system. Everything's going to retire and go away and get deleted at some point. Always be thinking in terms of that life cycle, not just in the moment of today. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck fighting the same fires over and over again.
I'll curse you, Mark. Now I've got that song stuck in my head for the next 2 days or something.
Always at your
Mark
service,
Simos,
sir.
right, exactly. So quick show of hands. Let's talk about simplification and kind of over complexity. How many firewalls do you have in your organization?
Firewall
no
rules.
shame here. Firewall. Not how many firewalls. Or maybe how many firewalls. How many firewall rules do you have in your organization? 100 or more? 200 or more? 500? No shame here. 1,000? Keep them up. 2,000? 10,000 or more? How about I don't know? I mean, realistically, no human being can keep this straight, right? That's that company I spoke about before. Our group policies were completely out of control. They had grown up over the course of 10 to 12 years. It was a 3-year cycle just to get them to a level where people could actually run the group policy analyzer and understand what was going to apply when. If we can't create simplicity and clarity, we have already lost much of the battle. This is the sort of nest of complexity, if you will, right? And it's related to lots of other anti-patterns. Human beings crave simplicity and clarity. Policy is often expressed in our technology. If technology can't be explained in a sentence or two, or in a paragraph or two, or in a word or two, we're probably too complex. It needs to be able to be expressed at the management level, at the decision maker level, and quite often we just simply can't do that. No human being can process this many rules, can really understand the thinking behind it, and I encourage you to bring simplicity and to create clarity every chance you get.
Yeah, because the whole point of policy is to express a human intent in the way that a human can understand it.
Yep.
And if you cannot understand your rules, well, are you going to be able to change them to be agile for the business needs? Are you going to be able to change them to be agile to the continuously evolving attackers? If you are afraid to change it, then you can't change, you can't evolve with the changing world, and you're going to be falling farther and farther behind.
That's a really good point. If my conditional access policies are so overly complex that I can't quickly mitigate attacks that I'm seeing, it becomes much harder to mitigate those attacks.
Yeah, and simplicity is always in the eye of the human, right? These systems are naturally complex under the hood. You want them to be following simple rules that humans, admins, security analysts, IT admins, business people can understand. The policy has to be clear to the people, and then the complexity comes from the implementation of it. And so it's really, really critical to be making sure that things are as simple as possible for the people that are using those systems. Click, click. Hey, it worked. It's voice activated.
Nice.
So how do you overcome these anti-patterns? One, as John mentioned earlier, focus on outcomes. And we'll talk about what those outcomes are in just a moment. But how does any given thing, this decision, this capability, this tool, this process, this change, how does that support the security outcomes? Ask those hard questions of yourself, your peers, and you can have some fun. We're here at RSA. Go to the expo floor and ask those of the vendors, how does this support my security outcomes? We have pre-warned our Microsoft folks, just as a heads up, so you're welcome to ask any vendor out there.
Bring it on.
We gave them a heads up that we were telling you all to do that, but go have some fun. And ask how this supports.
You should start with your favorite vendor. You should start with us and ask those hard questions. What's the strategy here? I mean, what are we really doing?
How does this help?
Yes.
And we'll give you some of the language for that in the next slide or two. We're going to tell you about some high impact areas in just a moment. Mm-hmm. And as just to reinforce what John said earlier, work together as a team. Work with your IT and your business and your security counterparts to understand the anti-patterns themselves and then how to avoid them. And then we've got some rule sets that if we have time, we'll kind of cover them a little bit, but they're all public and published out there that you can use as a guide to think through these and help overcome these anti-patterns. It is a team sport. Security is a team sport. Across vendors, across IT, across business, security must be a team sport. If we are sitting here fighting amongst themselves, the attackers will win. We have to work together.
That's a really good point. You should always, in my experience, in my opinion, you should always insist that your cybersecurity vendors are willing to work together. If they're trashing each other, everybody loses.
Yep. So, security outcomes, as promised. Our success is the attacker's failure. I would love to have outright failure every time, but we live in the real world. Sometimes we have to settle for disrupting them, slowing them down, increasing their cost, increasing their friction, slowing their speed, making them work twice as hard for a quarter of the victories. We are out to make the attackers fail. That is our job at the end of the day. Very, very simple, two sides of a coin, red versus blue, done. Where that breaks down into two different halves, left of bang. On the prevention side, this is the best place for controls if you can manage them, because if you can block that in the first place, especially with the static control, then doesn't cost you anything, attack over attack over attack, and it costs the attacker a bunch. So that's the best kind of controls if you can do them, but getting perfection there is hard. The way you want to think about this is the attackers have a whole lot of opportunities in this massive, complex technical estate, and then the processes and the people that manage it. So this is essentially an infinitely long list of things that you could always going to be burning down. You're going to be always prioritizing and keeping the cheapest and easiest things for attackers on the top, addressing those, going to the next one, raising stuff up that you just learned about that the attackers know how to do. If you haven't seen something for a while, it can drift down to the list. But you're always working on burning down that list of the easiest and cheapest stuff. And some of the easy signals on that is if they've used it on you, they'll probably use it again. If they used it on industry peers or some other organization, they'll probably try it on you. So the things that they use the most and the things that there are tools for and toolkits for, that's the stuff to focus on first, because that is the stuff that is easily available on their tool bench ready to go. Make sense?
Sometimes success there might be slowing an attacker down or making it difficult and expensive for an attacker, slowing them down enough so that you have the chance to sort of catch them right of bang.
Yep. And on right of bang, as I mentioned earlier, it's about time. If you happen to know your adversaries specifically and by name and track them, you can get much more precise. But the general rule is if you don't know that, which is most of the time, you're looking for time. If I, as an adversary, have 2.5 seconds or 2.5 minutes to operate, I can't get much done compared to 2.5 hours, days, weeks, months, or even years sometimes. You have to be able to reduce time that they have access to your assets, because that time allows them to discover, to explore, to exploit, and to execute their objectives of ransomware, data theft, disruption, record stealing, etc. You are trying to find them and remove them so that their dwell time, their time of accessing your assets, is as short as possible. That's right of bang. And at the end of the day, end-to-end collaboration. You need to have this data flowing between both sides. You cannot have your IT architects and operations people not know who the SOC is, not know what the SOC is doing. That cannot be a black box. What the SOC is experiencing is your best source of data. And that tells you not just, hey, we're going to block this IP. That is not solving the problem. They were trying to do this kind of exploit, this kind of scan. What can y'all do to make sure that that doesn't work? Right?
It's related to how we mitigate the Groundhog Day anti-pattern earlier, right? If we just keep blocking the same attacks, but we never talk to our IT folks, it's hard to improve, to really reduce the risk to the business.
Yeah, this is captured well in the Pyramid of Pain for those that are familiar with it. Y'all heard of that one? Yeah, look it up if you haven't. Pyramid of Pain, ultimately you want to be disrupting the things that are hard for the attackers to change. IPs, IOCs, file hashes, that's very trivial for them to change. That's the very bottom of it. You want to be moving your way up, so you're disrupting the things that are harder and harder for them to change. So the left of bang, right of bang thing is actually captured very well in the NIST cybersecurity framework with the identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, and now the governance wrapped around it in the V2. So I love to see that connection there, just so that folks can kind of see how this is captured in industry. Now, there's a lot more to security, and the NIST cybersecurity framework does a fantastic job of capturing the defense side. But again, this is where our industry kind of works a little bit in silos, because when you talk about attacks, you have to go to a different standard or a different set of guidance. I don't think they call it a standard. I forgot what they call it, but the MITRE ATT&CK framework, right? So you have to look at that for the attacks, and then what roles do what things? Well, that's not really mapped very well. So we're in the process through the Open Group Zero Trust reference model of pulling all these things together and mapping them together through something that we're calling the security matrix. Because we found it's really important to have that understanding and collaboration across all those to be centered on the attacks. Because if the attackers weren't attacking, would we have a job? Would this conference exist? Mm-hmm. It wouldn't, right? So that is the center of the workload that we have to deal with. And so we need to always be centering on those attacks and then building our defenses around them. And so we're working on those relationships there. So if y'all are either a part of the open group or interested in contributing, you can hit me up after the conference. But we are working on trying to solve that and bring all those things together.
So here's what we want to talk about: investing wisely with our cybersecurity budget. If you'd build that out, yeah, thanks. So privileged access is often where things go sideways really quickly, right? It's the sort of choke point for attackers to do what they want to do, which is often to compromise our high value assets, right? It's kind of like, I keep aging myself here, it's kind of like that old Mario game where there was that magic mushroom, and if the bad guy, in this case the attacker, eats the magic mushroom, I'm this big, he's this big, and I've got to try to sort of bring some clarity and some mitigation there, right? Things go sideways really, really fast when attackers get privileged access. That's, again, it's not a technology problem, right? The technology is behaving exactly the way we meant it to, right? Privileged access allows my admins to do what they need to do. It also allows bad guys and bad gals to do exactly what they need to do.
Yeah, the difference between an attack where the adversary gets admin versus not is night and day.
Yeah.
Like when they get admin, that's when the profile changes. It's a major breach, and you're in ugly, ugly territory. And you probably need to bring in the lawyers and the comms people.
We know that
those are the bad breaches.
We know that because our incident responders tell us that again and again and again. It's always or almost always admin.
Ever since Pass the Hash and Pass the Ticket came out, it's been that ugly.
Again, not technology problems, right? Those hashes and tickets are doing exactly what they're supposed to do. It's just that the bad guys are using them to their advantage. The other thing I encourage you to do here is to think long and hard and work with your business peers about your high value assets, right? There's an old saying that if you protect your paper clips and your diamonds with equal rigor, you'll end up with a whole lot of paper clips and and very few diamonds and a lot fewer diamonds. Understand what your high value assets are, right? How does your company make money? What are the things that, if they were compromised, would stop that flow of the ability to be able to compete in the open marketplace, right? You've got to really understand your high value assets in order to map the business risk back to security. And finally, think about identity, endpoint, and email at least as much and probably more than you think about network. I'm not standing up here and telling you that network signal is not important. It is. However, it's not the only thing. It's not even the main thing, right? Attackers will often get in through identity attacks, attack endpoints, and often start with email. So pay close attention to what's going on with those both admins and with those infrastructures.
Yeah, we enable our users to do their work and access all the docs and assets and databases through identity, endpoint, and email. That is how we do work. That is also how the attackers move around. If network isn't working, which firewalls tend to block pretty quickly, the attackers move up a layer and they're operating where your users are by stealing credentials and sending internal phishing emails and the like. They are navigating using that. You have to have your defensive and preventive controls, as well as your security operation detections and processes, and the skills of your SOC analysts. If they know how to break down an IP packet, but they have no flippant idea how OAuth works, you're going to be screwed in the cloud age. You absolutely have to bring up the tooling as well as the skills and knowledge of your analysts and your investigative procedures to be able to follow the attackers where they're going at that level. It's critical. You also still need to be versed and understand the networking thing as well, because that hasn't gone away, but you cannot do it just with networking alone.
Networks aren't
This is
closed
often
anymore.
called zero trust in many respects, or one of the first stages of
Really
the zero trust changes.
Exactly, we're really pushing towards zero trust, right? We can no longer trust that the network is the perimeter for trust anymore. Zero trust for our.
And speaking of network, one of our pet peeves.
Exactly, this is the pet peeve portion. Watch your language, right? I can't tell you how many times I've heard organizations say, we're here to protect the, whatever network name is. Some of you know exactly what I'm talking about here. You don't protect a network, right? You protect business assets. Just like you don't protect a road, you protect people and business assets on that road. You protect the things that really matter to the business, not the network.
Yeah.
This comes as expressed in our language.
Yeah, and this is a big one, because we did have those roots as security in the networking space.
Yep.
And it used to be we could trust the stuff that we put together, and I physically ran Cat5 and whatever back in the day to replace BNC. Like, we put all that effort in, we routed those networks, we did them, and we built all the stuff on it, but that doesn't mean the attackers can't get through it with phishing and all those other things. We have to be thinking about the business assets wherever they are, because they are outside of our traditional network perimeters. They're out on the cloud, they're out on mobile devices. We have to protect the assets where they are. We have to think in that asset-centric way. Oftentimes using a lot of the same controls, but not making those same assumptions that, oh, now that we have the firewall there, we don't have to worry about data, et cetera, inside of it. Well, you're not going to protect AI with a firewall. It doesn't quite work.
Yeah, this often comes from that physical layer, doesn't it? Pointing at a patch cable or pointing at a router. It's something we can see. It's a nice juicy target. It's not the best approach.
And so, need to be increasing collaboration among teams. And this is, you're making deals, right? At the end of the day, you're trying to make sure that everybody gets something out of it. We don't want one team winning at the expense of the other. We want people to be able to get benefits from it. A couple of ideas that we're sharing here. Technical summaries and business summaries of attacks is a really good way to get this started. Even though it's a pain in the butt, and SOC people hate writing reports, right? I mean, yeah, getting some head nods there. It's worth taking that time out. Find someone that does know how to document it, or just set up an unscheduled, or set up a meeting and say, hey, let's tell you about this latest attack we went through, and then the tech people talk to tech people. It's critical, because you want that to be a win-win situation. The SOC people don't want to keep investigating the same attack over and over again, and the IT architects and operations people don't want to be letting attacks through and having their systems get owned and then having to rebuild those systems. That's extra work they don't want to have to do. So, give them those technical summaries. The business folks are probably going to be extremely interested in what kind of attacks we're actually seeing, because they often don't get that. So if you create a business summary of that, SOC director, CISO, et cetera, summarizing that up, then all of a sudden they're like, wow, I didn't realize we were under this much attack. This helps me think about this whole cyber thing that the board keeps asking me about. And at the same time, they might even throw some funding and some people your way. So very important to start those communications and make good deals that are helpful to everyone. And as much as possible, use common language. Like, try and remember that SOC is a broad thing. They have to follow the attackers where they go, But that's not how I work as an IT server administrator or an identity administrator, or someone that only works on containers and the DevOps process. It has to be tailored in and focused for those roles, because they live, those left of bang folks work on a set of common things, unless it's a fairly small organization. And like I said, it doesn't have to be super formal. Kind of keying into the whole Mario Brothers thing. Hey, we like it a pizza, right? We're gonna have a pizza party. Come on out. We're gonna talk about the incident, right? Have some fun with it, right? Just we'll buy the pizza. You bring a couple SOC analysts. You bring some of the architects and engineers and operations folks. Let's sit down and talk about it and brainstorm. How can we do this? Let's talk about the attack and what would have stopped it, and would that work? Would it not work? Could we even implement that control, or is that something that's very far out of our budget or would break something internally? Let's have those conversations. Get people in a room.
So a couple calls to action. These are the things that we want you to do differently than you did an hour ago when you walked in this room. First, focus on security outcomes by asking how activity, technology, people, process supports them, right? Ask hard questions of yourself, of your peers, of your partners, and of your vendors.
And this helps break the silver bullet mindset. Yep.
Absolutely. Second, start with some really high impact areas, right? We talked about privileged access. We talked about high value assets, understanding what those high value assets are. You should probably be able to easily explain those to a layperson, the business that you're in, the business you're supporting. And finally, endpoint, identity, and email controls. Finally, we stressed again and again, work together as a team. IT, business folks, and security have to be on the same team here.
Yep, we want to leave a few minutes for questions, so very quickly, this is a quick summary of the Zero Trust commandments that help. These are open standard from the Open Group that talk about how to do security correctly, through the lens of Zero Trust, with Zero Trust being just modern security. Microsoft also published the Immutable Laws of Security originally about 20 years ago. We've updated them just a touch since then, but these are technical truths. We got kind of tired of a bunch of bug reports that weren't really bugs. Well, they're already admin. They already have physical access. We kind of got tired of telling the same thing over and over again, so we published that article. And then we realized that there was a similar pattern about 10, 15 years later as cyber became a business risk and a board level issue, that there was a similar set of common things. And so we wrote the rules to sort of overcome those mindsets. These are the truths at that risk level. And so with that, lots and lots of resources for you there. Our security option framework, where we got these anti-patterns from, that's part of our normal Microsoft Unified Delivery. And so this was sort of a sampling across a bunch of those. Security laws, the open group standards, et cetera. So feel free to visit those resources, and we'll happily take some questions now. I think we have a couple minutes.
3 minutes, all right.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi,
Hey.
is this thing on? Oh, thanks.
It's on.
Hi, I'm Maria. So the best practices you mentioned are mostly people-heavy processes and can be very complex when it comes to managing those inter-team relationships. What is your take on the ratio between security and other teams?
Ratio of numbers of people?
Yes. Like, is there a formula that you can share?
God, that's a good
I don't think
question.
there's a specific formula. A lot of it's going to depend on how people are process heavy the organization has been in security, like how far off balance they are. But ultimately, as long as you're looking at it holistically and say which ones are going to be burning us the most and which ones are going to burn us first, that's going to help get you to the right answer quickly. So there's no magic proportion that I'm aware of between people, process versus technology, but most of the teams that we end up seeing are pretty heavy on the technology focus and need to be sort of rebalanced back and then brought to balance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good question, thank you.
Yep.
Hey.
So they're anti-patterns because that's the first thing we go to. That's the logical. Yeah, let's do this. How do you tell somebody they're being, they're not thinking enough?
Well,
Basically, that's the hard part. You're doing an anti-pattern. Sounds polite to say you're doing it real wrong.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think you've got to speak the language that they speak. If it's a security person, you can put it in security terms, right? If it's a business person, we've got to speak that language. We've got to be able to kind of quickly translate security into business risk. And then to IT, Mark gave some examples before, like, we really don't want bad things to happen to this infrastructure. This ecosystem needs this. It's a matter of translating, I think, and also using some humor and some empathy.
Yeah, and tone of voice matters, because you can say, why the hell didn't you patch, versus why didn't you patch? Like, help me understand what caused
Yeah.
it, right? Like, it's just really about connecting with them and showing respect that, hey, you know that they have 10,000 other things they're worrying about. You know this has to be on the priority list, but help me understand the other one so I can help you. And it's all about the way you approach it in many cases.
Right.
Thank you.
I'm a D&D player, and the hacker friction thing, I usually say my job is to make the hacker roll the skill roll enough times that he eventually rolls a 1. So I totally get that.
Nice.
That's great. Yeah, sometimes just making them do the secondary roll can slow them down a lot. I like that.
Awesome. So thank y'all, and we'll be
Thanks,
hanging
everyone.
out and taking more later if you want.
Thanks, y'all.